There is a moment in every toxic relationship when truth steps into the room and suddenly everything changes. Not because the narcissist becomes honest, but because they realize they've been exposed. And when a person who survives on illusion meets undeniable truth, their reaction is not transformation, it is strategy. Today you must understand this. When a narcissist knows they are guilty, they don't surrender, they shift tactics. And if you don't recognize these patterns, you may mistake manipulation for remorse. When a narcissist is confronted with undeniable guilt, something very calculated begins to happen beneath the surface. It is not panic in the way you might expect from someone who has done wrong. It is a strategic shift. Instead of moving toward truth, they begin to move away from it with precision. They don't simply deny what happened. They redesign the entire reality around the event. This is not random behavior. It is a defense mechanism built over time, refined through experience, and used whenever their image is at risk. You must understand that for them, truth is not a fixed standard. It is a flexible tool. Facts are not something to respect. They are something to reshape. When guilt threatens to expose them, they instinctively begin rewriting the story in a way that protects their identity. They may start by minimizing what happened, turning something serious into something small, misunderstood, or taken out of context. If that doesn't work, they escalate the distortion. Details begin to change. Timelines shift. Words are reinterpreted. Intentions are redefined. Before long, the original reality becomes unrecognizable. And here is where it becomes dangerous. Not because of what they say, but because of how consistently they say it. Repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity can begin to feel like truth if you are not grounded. They rely on this psychological principle. They repeat their version of events with confidence, not because it is accurate, but because confidence can influence perception. The more certain they sound, the more they hope you will begin to question your own memory. This is where many people begin to lose their footing. You may start asking yourself, did I misunderstand? Or am I overreacting? That internal questioning is exactly what they are aiming for. Because the moment you begin to doubt your own perception, they gain control over the narrative. And once they control the narrative, they control the outcome. But let's go deeper. This rewriting of reality is not always loud or aggressive. Sometimes it is subtle. They may agree with parts of what happened, but insert small changes that shift the responsibility away from them. They might say, yes, that happened, but you're forgetting what you did before that, or you're not seeing the full picture. These statements sound reasonable on the surface, but they are designed to redirect focus. The goal is not clarity, it is confusion. Over time, this pattern can make you feel mentally exhausted. You may find yourself trying to gather evidence, replay conversations in your mind, or explain your perspective again and again, hoping that this time they will understand. But here is the truth you must accept. They already understand. The issue is not a lack of comprehension. It is a refusal to accept responsibility. You cannot win a conversation with someone who is committed to distortion, because you are trying to align with truth and they are trying to protect an image. Those are two completely different objectives. And when two people are operating from different objectives, no amount of explanation will create alignment. Another layer of this behavior is their ability to recruit others into their rewritten reality. They may share their version of events with friends, family, or even strangers, carefully crafting a narrative where they appear innocent or wronged. By doing this, they create external validation for their story. And when multiple voices begin to reflect that same distorted version, it can make you feel isolated, as if you are the only one who sees what really happened. But listen carefully. Numbers do not determine truth. Just because more people believe a story does not make it accurate. It only means the story was told effectively. You must learn to separate perception from reality. Their version of events is designed to protect them, not to reflect what actually occurred. And if you try to correct every misunderstanding or defend yourself against every false narrative, you will drain your energy fighting battles that were never meant to be won. Strength in this situation is not about proving them wrong. Strength is about remaining anchored in what you know to be true, regardless of how convincingly they present something different. It is about trusting your memory, your experience, and your awareness, even when someone else is trying to rewrite it in front of you. There is a powerful shift that happens when you stop engaging in their reconstructed reality. When you no longer argue over every detail, when you no longer feel the need to convince them, when you no longer chase validation for your truth, you remove yourself from the game entirely. And without your participation, their strategy begins to lose its effectiveness. Because their rewritten reality depends on your reaction. It depends on your confusion, your defense, your emotional engagement. When those elements are no longer present, the illusion has nothing to feed on. So understand this deeply. You're not obligated to agree with a distorted version of events just because it is presented with confidence. You are not required to abandon your clarity to maintain peace. And you are not responsible for carrying a narrative that was created to protect someone else's ego. Your responsibility is to stay grounded in truth, even when it stands alone. And when you do that consistently, something powerful happens. You become untouchable by manipulation that relies on confusion. Because clarity is your protection. And once you truly hold on to it, no rewritten reality can take it away from you. Projection is one of the most subtle yet powerful psychological defenses you will ever encounter. And when a narcissist knows they are guilty, this tactic becomes almost automatic. Instead of processing their wrongdoing, they redirect it. Instead of sitting with accountability, they shift the emotional burden onto you. Suddenly, the very behavior they are responsible for becomes the accusation they throw in your direction. And if you are not deeply aware, you may find yourself defending against something you never even did. Understand this clearly. Projection is not random. It is intentional self-preservation. The narcissist cannot afford to accept guilt because their identity is built on the illusion of superiority and control. To admit fault would crack the foundation of who they believe themselves to be. So rather than adjusting their behavior, they adjust the narrative. They turn the spotlight away from themselves and shine it directly onto you. This is why you might hear things that feel confusing, even shocking. If they were dishonest, they will accuse you of lying. If they were unfaithful, they will question your loyalty. If they were manipulative, they will label you as controlling. It feels disorienting because it is designed to be. The goal is not truth. The goal is emotional imbalance. When you are thrown off balance, you become easier to control. And here is where many people lose their footing. They begin to explain. They begin to defend. They begin to over-justify their actions in an attempt to prove innocence. But in doing so, they unknowingly accept the false frame that has been created. They step into a conversation that was never rooted in truth to begin with. You must recognize that projection creates a psychological trap. It pulls you into a position where you feel the need to clear your name, while the narcissist quietly escapes accountability. The more energy you spend defending yourself, the less attention is placed on their actions. And that is exactly what they want. This tactic also has a deeper emotional impact. Over time, repeated projection can cause you to question your own reality. You may begin to think, what if they're right? Even when your intuition tells you otherwise. This internal conflict is not a sign of weakness. It is the result of prolonged exposure to manipulation. When someone repeatedly distorts reality, even the strongest mind can begin to feel uncertain. But clarity returns the moment you shift your focus. Instead of asking, how do I prove them wrong? You must ask, why am I being placed in this position? Because the truth is, a healthy conversation seeks resolution, not confusion. A healthy person takes responsibility, not refuge in accusation. When blame replaces accountability, you are no longer in a space of honesty. You are in a space of control. Projection also thrives on emotional reaction. The more you react, whether with anger, frustration, or desperation, the more effective the tactic becomes. Your reaction becomes proof in their eyes that their accusation holds weight. But in reality, your reaction is simply a human response to being falsely accused. Still, they will use it to reinforce their narrative. This is why emotional discipline becomes your greatest strength. When you stop reacting impulsively, you disrupt the entire strategy. When you refuse to engage in false accusations, you remove the fuel that keeps the manipulation alive. And when you stand firm in your truth without the need to defend it endlessly, you begin to shift the dynamic completely. It is also important to understand that projection is not about misunderstanding. It is about avoidance. The narcissist knows what they are doing. On some level, they are aware of their guilt. But awareness without accountability leads to distortion. Instead of correcting themselves, they distort you. And this is where your power lies, in recognition. Once you can identify projection for what it is, it loses much of its influence. You no longer internalize the accusations. You no longer feel compelled to fight every false claim. You begin to observe rather than absorb. And in that observation, you regain control over your own perception. You must also release the need for them to admit the truth. Projection often continues because the narcissist is unwilling to face themselves. Waiting for acknowledgement will keep you trapped in a cycle that never resolves. Your clarity cannot depend on their confession. It must come from your own understanding. So when the accusations come, do not rush to defend. When the blame shifts, do not rush to carry it. Pause. Observe. Recognize the pattern. Because the moment you see projection clearly, it no longer defines your reality. And remember this, truth does not become false just because someone denies it. And lies do not become true just because someone repeats them with confidence. Your responsibility is not to correct their distortion. It is to remain grounded in your truth. Silence in a healthy mind is often a place of reflection. It is where a person processes truth, evaluates behavior, and prepares for growth. But in the mind of a narcissist, silence is rarely about reflection. It is about control. When they know they are guilty, when they realize the truth has surfaced and their actions can no longer be easily denied, they often withdraw. Not because they are thinking deeply about what they have done, but because they are calculating their next move. Their silence is not empty, it is strategic. You must understand this clearly. Their silence is not peace, it is pressure. When a narcissist goes silent after being exposed, they are attempting to create an emotional vacuum around you. Human beings are wired to seek connection, clarity, and closure. When communication suddenly disappears, it disrupts your emotional balance. You begin to wonder, did I go too far? Should I have said it differently? Maybe I misunderstood. This is exactly where they want you, questioning yourself instead of holding them accountable. Because the moment you begin to doubt your own clarity, you move away from the truth and closer to their control. Silence becomes a tool to shift the focus. Instead of the conversation being about their behavior, it becomes about your discomfort. You are no longer addressing the issue. You are trying to restore communication. You are trying to fix the distance. And in doing so, you unintentionally release them from responsibility. This is why their silence is powerful. It redirects the entire dynamic without a single word being spoken. But there is another layer to this. Their silence is often designed as punishment. It is meant to make you feel the absence of their presence, as if it is something valuable you have lost. They want you to associate speaking the truth with emotional withdrawal. In other words, they train you subtly and repeatedly that whenever you confront them, you will be met with distance, coldness, and disconnection. Over time, this conditions you to avoid confrontation altogether. Not because you don't see the truth, but because you want to avoid the emotional cost of their silence. And that is where the real danger lies. Because when silence trains you to suppress your voice, you begin to abandon yourself. You start choosing comfort over truth, peace over clarity, and temporary harmony over long-term health. You begin to walk on emotional eggshells, carefully measuring your words, not to communicate honestly, but to avoid triggering their withdrawal. And in that process, you lose your authenticity. But you must wake up to this pattern. Silence that manipulates is not maturity, it is control. A person who is genuinely reflecting may take space, but they will communicate that intention. They will say, I need time to think, or I want to process this so we can talk better. Their silence has direction and purpose. But a narcissist's silence is different. It is abrupt, unexplained, and often prolonged. It leaves you in uncertainty, not understanding. It creates anxiety, not resolution. And most importantly, it avoids accountability. You must also recognize that their silence is often a test. They are watching to see how you respond. Will you chase them? Will you apologize for something you didn't do? Will you break your position just to restore connection? Because if you do, you have taught them something very important. You have taught them that silence works. And once they know it works, they will use it again. And again, and again. This is why your response to their silence determines the future of the dynamic. If you respond with desperation, they gain power. If you respond with fear, they gain control. If you respond with clarity and self-respect, they lose their advantage. You must come to a place where silence does not intimidate you, where the absence of communication does not create panic within you, where you understand that someone refusing to speak does not invalidate your truth, because your truth does not depend on their participation. Let this sink into your spirit. You do not need noise to validate what you already know. When you stop reacting to their silence, something powerful happens. The pressure they tried to place on you returns to them. The control they attempted to gain begins to slip, because their strategy only works if you engage with it emotionally. The moment you remain grounded, the moment you refuse to chase, the moment you hold your position without anxiety, that is the moment their silence loses its power. And here is the deeper lesson. Your peace must become stronger than your need for resolution. Not every situation will end with closure. Not every conversation will bring understanding. And not every person will take responsibility for their actions. But your growth is not determined by their behavior. It is determined by your response. So when they go silent, do not interpret it as strength. Do not mistake it for maturity. And do not allow it to control your emotional state. See it for what it is, a strategy born out of fear and avoidance. Stand firm in your clarity. Stay anchored in your truth. And remember this, someone who uses silence to manipulate you is revealing more about their character than your worth. Because real strength communicates, real maturity confronts truth, and real growth does not hide behind silence. It speaks, it owns, and it evolves. And when you reach the point where their silence no longer moves you, you will realize something powerful. You have outgrown the need for their voice to validate your reality. When guilt rises to the surface in a narcissistic person, something very calculated begins to unfold. Instead of facing the weight of their actions, they attempt to rewrite the emotional atmosphere around you. Suddenly, the same person who was distant, dismissive, or even harmful becomes unusually attentive. They may speak softer, smile more, give compliments they once withheld, or offer affection that feels almost overwhelming. At first glance, it can feel like a breakthrough, as if something has finally clicked inside them. But you must learn to look beyond the surface, because not every display of love is rooted in truth. What you're witnessing in that moment is not necessarily transformation, it is strategy. It is a rapid emotional adjustment designed to regain control of the situation. When they sense that you are pulling away, becoming aware, or seeing through their behavior, they understand that their influence over you is at risk. And rather than repairing the damage through accountability, they attempt to reset the connection through emotional intensity. This sudden wave of charm is often confusing because it directly contrasts with their previous behavior. You may find yourself thinking maybe they've changed, or maybe they didn't mean it. That inner dialogue is exactly what they are trying to trigger. Because if they can get you to question your own perception, they can redirect your focus away from the truth and back into emotional attachment. You must understand that timing reveals intention. Genuine love is consistent. It does not appear only when someone is about to lose you. Real care does not need a crisis to express itself. But when affection suddenly increases right after exposure, right after conflict, or right after you begin to set boundaries, it is not random, it is reactive. This is where many people get trapped. They confuse intensity with sincerity. They mistake emotional highs for meaningful change. But intensity is easy to produce. It is sustainable change that reveals character. Anyone can become temporarily kind when they are afraid of losing control. But true growth shows itself in responsibility, humility, and consistency over time. There is also a deeper psychological layer to this behavior. A narcissistic person depends on what is often called emotional supply, your attention, your validation, your reaction. When guilt threatens to disrupt that supply, they instinctively move to protect it. And one of the most effective ways to do that is through what feels like love, because love disarms you. Love softens your defenses. Love makes you reconsider your decision to step back. But you must become wise enough to ask yourself an important question. Is this love, or is this fear disguised as love? Because when someone is acting out of fear of losing control, their actions are not centered on your well-being. They are centered on preserving their position in your life. And that is a crucial difference. One is about giving, the other is about keeping. Another important detail is that this phase rarely lasts. The charm, the affection, the attention, it often fades once they feel that control has been restored. Once they sense that you are emotionally re-engaged, that you have softened, that you are no longer holding them accountable, the urgency behind their behavior disappears. And slowly, sometimes subtly, they return to the patterns that caused the pain in the first place. This cycle can be exhausting if you do not recognize it. It creates emotional confusion because you are constantly moving between hope and disappointment. One moment you feel valued, the next you feel neglected or invalidated again. And over time, this inconsistency can weaken your ability to trust your own judgment. That is why awareness is your greatest protection. You must learn to observe patterns, not moments. Anyone can create a powerful moment, but patterns reveal truth. If kindness only appears after conflict, if affection only shows up when you are pulling away, if change is temporary and conditional, then what you are seeing is not transformation, it is adaptation. And adaptation is not the same as growth. Growth requires self-awareness. It requires the ability to admit fault without being forced. It requires the willingness to face uncomfortable truths and make lasting changes. But manipulation only requires timing. It only requires knowing when to say the right words, when to show the right emotion, and when to create the right illusion. So do not allow yourself to be moved only by what feels good in the moment. Learn to value what remains true over time. Because your peace, your clarity, and your emotional stability are too valuable to be negotiated by temporary displays of affection. Stand firm in your awareness. Let your decisions be guided by consistency, not intensity. And remember this, real love does not appear only when it is about to be lost. It exists, it remains, and it proves itself without needing a crisis to activate it. When a narcissist realizes that guilt is closing in on them, they rarely confront it directly. Instead, they manufacture distraction. They introduce emotional storms, sudden conflicts, unexpected accusations, or even dramatic crises that seem urgent and overwhelming. This is not random behavior, it is calculated. Chaos becomes their shield because truth requires stillness, and stillness is the one environment they cannot control. You must understand the psychology behind this. Truth is simple, direct, and consistent. But chaos is complex, emotional, and disorienting. When you are pulled into chaos, your focus shifts from clarity to survival. You stop asking what really happened and start asking, how do I fix this situation right now? That shift is exactly what they want. Because the moment your attention leaves the original issue, accountability disappears. Notice how quickly the narrative changes. One moment, you're addressing something concrete, something real, something they did. The next moment, you are defending yourself against unrelated accusations. Suddenly, your tone is the problem. Your reaction is the issue. Your past mistakes are being brought into the present. And before you realize it, the original truth is buried under layers of emotional noise. This is not confusion, it is redirection. They know that if they can overwhelm you emotionally, they can weaken you mentally. And if they weaken you mentally, they can control the outcome. Chaos is not just about distraction, it is about dominance. It is about regaining control in a situation where they feel exposed. Sometimes this chaos appears as anger, explosive, intense, and intimidating. Other times it appears as victimhood, tears, sadness, and emotional breakdowns designed to make you feel guilty for even bringing up the issue. And in some cases it appears as urgency, a sudden problem that demands immediate attention, pulling you away from the truth you are about to confront. But here's the key lesson. Urgency is often the enemy of clarity. When everything feels urgent, nothing gets resolved. You get caught in cycles of reaction instead of standing in a position of awareness. And the narcissist counts on this. They rely on your empathy, your desire for peace, and your willingness to fix things quickly. They use your strengths against you. You must become aware of the pattern, because once you see it, it loses its power. When chaos begins to rise, pause. Do not match their intensity. Do not chase every accusation. Do not attempt to resolve 10 different problems at once. Instead, return to the original truth. Anchor yourself in what actually happened. Ask yourself, what was the issue before all this noise began? That question alone can break the cycle, because chaos thrives on movement, but clarity thrives on stillness. You have to discipline your mind not to be pulled in every direction. This requires emotional strength. It requires patience. It requires the courage to sit in discomfort without reacting impulsively. Because when you react impulsively, you step into their game. But when you remain grounded, you step out of it. And understand this, you are not obligated to participate in confusion. You do not have to answer every accusation. You do not have to defend yourself against every distortion. You do not have to engage in every emotional storm. Sometimes the most powerful response is restraint. Sometimes the strongest position is silence. Not the kind of silence that is fearful, but the kind that is controlled, intentional, and rooted in clarity. Because when you stop feeding the chaos, it begins to collapse. And this is where your power begins to rise. Not in proving them wrong, but in refusing to be moved by their tactics. Not in winning the argument, but in refusing to play the game. You must shift your mindset from reaction to awareness, from emotional impulse to intentional response, from confusion to clarity. Because at the end of the day, chaos is temporary, but truth is permanent. And when you learn to stand in truth regardless of the noise around you, you become unshakable. The distractions lose their grip. The emotional storms lose their force. And the narcissist loses the one thing they were trying to regain, control over you. That is why mastering this moment is so important. Because it is not just about understanding their behavior. It is about transforming yours. It is about becoming someone who cannot be easily manipulated, distracted, or emotionally overpowered. And once you reach that level of awareness, something powerful happens. You stop reacting to chaos, and you start seeing through it. And when you can see through it, it can no longer control you. At the deepest level, what drives their behavior is not a moral struggle with right and wrong. It is a desperate need to protect the image they have carefully constructed. When they know they are guilty, something shifts internally, but not in the way most people expect. A healthy person, when confronted with guilt, may feel remorse, reflect, and take responsibility. But here, guilt does not lead to growth. It triggers fear. Not fear of hurting you, but fear of being seen clearly. Because to them, exposure is more dangerous than the wrongdoing itself. You must understand this clearly. Their identity is built on perception, not authenticity. They rely on how others see them to maintain their sense of control and superiority. So when guilt threatens to expose the truth, it shakes the very foundation of who they believe themselves to be. And when a person feels their identity is under attack, they will do almost anything to defend it. This is why their reactions can seem extreme, unpredictable, or even irrational. But there is a pattern, always a pattern. Every move they make in that moment is designed to shift attention away from their guilt and back onto maintaining control. They may become overly defensive, not because they are misunderstood, but because they are trying to shut down the conversation before it goes deeper. They may attack your character, question your memory, or accuse you of overreacting, not because your concerns are invalid, but because your clarity is dangerous to them. Your awareness becomes a threat. And the more accurately you see them, the more urgently they try to distort your vision. In many cases, they will prioritize protecting their reputation over preserving the relationship. They may lie convincingly, not just to you, but to others around them. They may create narratives where they appear innocent, even heroic, while subtly painting you as unstable or difficult. This is not sluchino, it is strategic. Because if they can control how others perceive the situation, they reduce the risk of being fully exposed. And once they feel their external image is secure, they believe they have regained power. What makes this dynamic even more challenging is that they may show moments of apparent vulnerability. They might admit small faults, offer partial apologies, or express just enough regret to appear accountable. But pay close attention, these moments are often calculated. They are not surrendering to truth, they are managing the situation. By giving a little, they aim to avoid giving everything. By appearing remorseful, they attempt to close the case without truly addressing the issue. It is a controlled release, not a genuine transformation. You must also recognize that their fear of exposure often leads them to escalate rather than de-escalate. Instead of resolving the conflict, they intensify it. They may bring up past issues, unrelated arguments, or emotional triggers to overwhelm you. Because when you are overwhelmed, you are less focused. And when you are less focused, the original issue, their guilt, gets buried under layers of confusion and emotional noise. But here's the truth you must hold on to. Their fear does not define your reality. Their attempts to distort, distract, or deflect do not change what actually happened. Reality does not bend to manipulation. Truth does not disappear because it is denied. And your clarity is not invalid just because someone refuses to acknowledge it. This is where your strength must rise. Not in trying to force them to admit the truth, but in your ability to stand firm without their validation. Because the trap is not just their behavior, it is the belief that you need their confession to confirm what you already know. And the moment you release that need, you remove their leverage. Understand this. When someone fears exposure more than they value honesty, they are showing you their priorities. And you must decide yours. Will you continue to engage in a cycle where truth is constantly negotiated? Or will you step into a position where your awareness is enough? Growth for you begins when you stop trying to fix their response and start strengthening your own clarity. It begins when you recognize that their fear-driven actions are not a reflection of your worth, but a revelation of their limitations. And once you see that clearly, you no longer take their behavior personally. You see it strategically. And that awareness changes everything. Because when you are no longer emotionally entangled in their reactions, you become grounded. You become steady. You become unshakable. Their tactics lose power, not because they stop using them, but because they stop working on you. In the end, their greatest struggle is not with you. It is with the possibility of being fully seen. But your greatest strength is not in exposing them. It is in refusing to lose yourself in the process.